When news breaks, go beyond the headlines with the MSNBC app.
We begin with breaking news from Washington, D.C.
Watch your favorite shows live.
It can feel difficult to wrap your head around all of the news that will just not stop unfolding.
Get real-time analysis from live blogs to in-depth essays and the latest updates on the 2024 election.
A point or two could be all it takes to sway the outcome.
Go beyond the what to understand the why. Download the app now at msnbc.com/app.
Today, on a very special 2-hour early bird edition of the ReidOut.
I'm very proud of the work that we have done that has brought inflation down to less than 3%. The work that we have done to cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors. Donald Trump said he was going to do a number of things, including allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. Never happened. We did it.
Some people don't eat bacon anymore. And we are going to get the energy prices down. When we get energy down, you know, this was caused by their horrible energy wind. They want wind all over the place.
Dude, what? As Vice President Kamala Harris was discussing the issues, Grampy Trump was rambling about the wind and bacon or something. And now he's trying out a new pitch on abortion, literally flip-flopping to the Democratic positions, while his far-right Handmaid's Tale base is warning him to get back in line under his eye. Also tonight, the fight over book banning is far from over. I will be joined by a Louisiana librarian who has faced years of harassment after speaking out against censorship, and she has written a new book about it. Plus, the power of the Latino vote, more than 36 million voters strong, and how both campaigns are trying to win this huge and diverse constituency over. But we begin tonight with the CNN interview the collective media demanded of Vice President Kamala Harris, which she and her running mate, Tim Walz, granted to CNN's Dana Bash last night. And according to Nielsen ratings, it was a ratings hit. 6 million Americans tuned in to watch. What they saw was a roughly half-hour-long discussion where only 4 of the questions, 4, were not based on Republican attack lines against the Democratic ticket. It looked something like this.
You said there's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. So yes. So it changed in that campaign?
In 2020, I made very clear where I stand. We are in 2024, and I've not changed that position, nor will I going forward. I kept my word, and I will keep my word.
There was a debate. You raised your hand when asked whether or not the border should be decriminalized. Do you still believe that?
I believe there should be consequence. We have laws that have to be followed and enforced that address and deal with people who cross our border illegally.
Should they feel comfortable and confident that what you're saying now is going to be your policy moving forward?
Dana, I think the most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed.
At the same time, in La Crosse, Wisconsin, Donald Trump was at a town hall, which apparently Trump at first didn't realize was a town hall, moderated by former Democratic presidential candidate turned Trumper Tulsi Gabbard, who recently endorsed the Republican convicted felon and adjudicated sexual assaulter. The town hall was yet another unhinged performance where the former president continued to unravel right before our very eyes. Seemingly confused about what he was doing there and rambling about a litany of grievances from bacon and wind farms to his favorite side topic, immigrants allegedly taking the black jobs.
I had a speech all set for you. I was ready. They said, sir, you're actually doing a town hall. I said, oh, nobody told me that. They're coming in by millions and millions, and a lot of them are taking the jobs for the black population. They are a threat to democracy. I'm not a threat to democracy. I mean, they picked this guy. He is weird. Right? He's weird. I'm not weird. She was for everything that you're not against. I could go through 14 different. She's changed in every single one of them.
Oh boy, that last bit is a point Trump and his campaign have harped on, which is odd, coming from a guy who changed his party affiliation 5 times and changed his own positions even more. Like how he used to support a woman's right to choose and then supported punishing women for choosing to have an abortion, a position he continues to flip-flop on. Trump is set to speak at the annual gathering of Moms for Liberty later this evening, and who knows what he'll believe by the time he gets there. Vice President Kamala Harris and President Joe Biden, meanwhile, will make their first appearance together since she became the Democratic presidential nominee in Pennsylvania on Labor Day. Her campaign also announced that it is launching a 50-plus stop reproductive freedom bus tour. The first stop will be next Tuesday with an event near Donald Trump's Palm Beach, Florida home. I have a great panel to discuss all of this. New York Times columnist Charles Blow, New York Times Molly Jong Fast, special correspondent for Vanity Fair, Charlie Sykes, MSNBC contributor and columnist, and David Rothkopf, columnist for the Daily Beast. Thank you all for being here. I think I mushed everybody's things together. You all are just really great journalists who are hanging out with me for a while. So we're going to go with that. Molly, I'm going to come to you first because you and I have been chittery-chatting on this off camera. So I just supposed to bring out, there was a demand that this interview happen.
Yes.
The Harris campaign has been just harangued by the media, by the press. You must give us an interview.
Right.
Were you as surprised? Well, I guess I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed at what was done with the interview. And I'm not bashing Dana Bash, not at all. And this is not about her. But when the media demands an interview, it's interesting that only 4 of the questions were not, hey, Donald Trump said this horrible thing about you, respond.
Yeah, I would like to pull back for a minute and say that before the media decided that the Harris-Walz campaign needed to do an interview, Donald Trump started. Republicans were like, why won't she sit for an interview? She must sit for an interview. Then the media went on this train. And
because don't they always, whatever Trump says, the media says, oh, that must be the story. Let's now recycle that and put it in our words.
He tends to have some success as assignment editor.
Yeah.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But people don't look at him critically at all in the media, which I think is surprising considering his long list of lies and untruths. But I thought what I thought was interesting, there was a lot of pressure for her to sit for this interview. She sat for an interview. The goal of an interview is to get as much information as possible.
Correct.
So when you ask her these, why should she have to defend herself against a smear? Like, what would the possible, I think she did a great job of shutting down questions that were unanswerable. Like asking her what she thought about Donald Trump saying nasty things about her identity, being racist. Like, what would she say? I thought she dealt with that really well. She said, next question.
What is she supposed to say? Charles Blow, and I knew this question was coming. I knew it because I've been in this business a long time, okay? The idea that we are now simply recycling things Donald Trump says into what the media wants to know, as if that is helpful to any voter. There is a black person sitting right in front of you. And you're literally going to ask them to justify, are they black? You can see them. You are visually looking at them. It's called television. You can see them. The camera can see them. And she definitely black. So my question is, these questions are workshopped, right? And so as an entity, this media entity decided that out of the maybe 10 questions they were going to get, the limited time they had available, that's what you ask? Your thoughts, Charles? I think you're mute. You're on mute. Ooh, the gremlins are getting Charles Blow. Wait, rewind. Stop. Unmute yourself and start again, Charles. I definitely want to hear what you have to say. You still muted? He's still muted. Okay, we're going to hold Charles. We're going to figure out Charles's audio situation. Let me go to David Rothkopf. And look, we're not trying to bash I just want to be very clear. We're not being like media organization, nah. But David Rothkopf, we have a limited opportunity. I've interviewed Vice President Harris. I would love to interview her again. But there are so many policy questions on the table that are so interesting, there's going to be perhaps 2 woman presidents in our hemisphere at the same time. The new president of Mexico is a woman. What will be the policies toward Latin America? You've got Maduro happening in Venezuela. This is a huge crisis, right near us, and it's the south of Mexico. There's so many interesting regional questions, economic questions to unpack with her. And we're unpacking whether the black lady sitting in front of this interviewer is black. And I'm depressed.
Well, I'm sorry you're depressed. You should. I question why you're being quite as charitable as you're being towards Dana Bash and CNN, because the reality is you're right. They could have picked any question. They could have talked about the future. They could have talked about where the economy is going from here. They could have talked about AI. They could have talked about how you build on the successes of the Biden administration. They could have cast a lot of these questions in the context of Trump and some of the problems that exist with Trump or with Vance, just the things that he's done this week that are outrageous, whether it's at Arlington Cemetery or whether he's tweeting lewd comments about Kamala. I can't even believe that story has disappeared.
Yes.
That somehow this guy has tweeted this thing that is utterly repulsive and disqualifying in the midst of a campaign that seems to be dedicated to make sure that no woman in America votes for him. That didn't come up. Abortion didn't come up. And that's the fault of somebody. It didn't just fall from the sky, right? It didn't fall out of a coconut tree. Dana Bash and her colleagues chose to do it that way. And it was a big mistake. And what it conveyed to the audience was, this is why we don't do these interviews.
Yeah.
Because they don't add value.
Absolutely. And Charles Blau, I understand that you are back. The gremlins have freed you and released you. Because here's the thing. The media demands these interviews. And one wonders if the purpose of the interview is so the media gets to finally hit the Democrat with whatever it is that Donald Trump is saying about them. Because if I'm a voter and I just want to know who to vote for and I'm undecided, asking that black lady if she's black is not going to help me decide that, because I already know that she's black. She's black like Halle Berry's black. I hate to break it to y'all. A lot of your favorite black people have a white parent. Okay. I mean, this isn't shocking. And this isn't like a thing that you need to like litigate with people, or have a non-black parent. Like that's like a normal, but so that doesn't help. And so if a 10th of your interview is that, and 60% of your interview is Donald Trump said this thing about you, what do you say about it? How does that help a voter decide anything? I'm done, Randy. Go, Charles.
Right. But what it does do is it helps Kamala Harris tremendously. This was the best gift that the media and, the establishment could have given to her. I had written about it. I just said, she's riding a wave. She doesn't need to do any interviews. Keep a good thing going as long as you can. But if you're going to give it, and you're going to get questions like this, really softball kind of questions. And there are some tough questions that are very hard to answer and keep the Democratic coalition together.
Sure.
Questions around Gaza. I mean, there's a lot of questions out there that really will test a candidate and figure out whether or not you can hold that coalition. But what this did was allow her to basically kind of escape any sort of, the point here was to do no harm. She did no harm to herself.
No.
I think they looked great. The chemistry looked great. And I think a lot of times what people are voting on is a feeling, and they want to justify that feeling with policy. A lot of the policies that I was worried about when Biden was the nominee are still the policies that I'm worried about. But there are more donors now, there are more volunteers now, and a lot of that is driven by a feeling. And what Kamala Harris and Tim Walz were able to do was to underscore that the feeling is justified. I have this under control. We are in command. And we are on top of the issues that they ask us about. They're not even going to ask us about all the issues. So I think it's a big win for them.
I totally agree. I mean, this interview did no harm. 6 million people watched it, Charlie Sykes. Big win for them. They got to show their chemistry. And then people going, oh, she needed Tim Walz with her. No, CNN got a coup because they got the first interview with both of them. And that is what CNN wanted. And that's what they got. So if people are just understand how the game is played, y'all. All these networks want an interview with each of them. CNN scored an interview with both of them. So all that was CNN winning, right? And getting a good ratings win. But none of this, Charlie, answers the questions of other than you'd see that they get along great, they have great chemistry, and they did no harm to themselves in a situation in which they were meeting a media demand.
Well, let's just pull back the lens, because it's not just that interview last night. It's this incredible imbalance, not just in the media, but in American politics right now, because we're now parsing through, did Kamala Harris change her position on fracking? While Meanwhile, you have the felonious, rapey, seditionist ex-president of the United States, tweeting out 50 tweets from QAnon, talking about jailing his opponents, going off on these wild, bizarre rants about bacon and windmills. And to David's point, just a couple of days ago, he's actually tweeting out this vulgar, sexual attack on her. And it's like we need need to kind of keep all of that in perspective.
Yeah.
That these things, one thing is not like the other.
And meanwhile, folks, Molly, are taking seriously this idea that Donald Trump he's proposed a policy on IVF. We're going to take that seriously, for real. Here is Donald Trump speaking with NBC's Dasha Burns about IVF.
Under the Trump administration, we are going to be paying for that treatment. So we are paying for that treatment, all Americans that get it. All Americans that need it. So we're going to be paying for that treatment, or we're going to be mandating that the insurance company pay.
In Florida, the state that you are a resident of, there's an abortion-related amendment on the ballot to overturn the 6-week ban in Florida. How are you going to vote on that?
Well, I think the 6 week is too short. It has to be more time, and so and I've told them that I want more weeks.
So you'll vote in favor of the amendment?
I am going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks.
A mandate, you say. Mandate, you say, sir. Mandate. So when the children are born, they can die of measles and COVID, but we can't mandate that. You can't mandate vaccines. We're going to mandate $50,000 IVF treatments. Let me now let you play the reason we should not be taking seriously anything Trump says now about abortion or IVF, which, by the way, far right-wing evangelicals believe is sinful and demonic, okay? Here he is talking about what he thinks should happen to women who get abortion back in the day, 2016, on Hardball.
Do you believe in punishment for abortion? Yes or no, as a principle?
The answer is that there has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form.
This is what we might call in the Washington Post great piece, the make wild healthcare promises portion of the Trump campaign. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually read that piece and I was like, oh, that's right.
Yeah.
And he did in 2017. He said he's going to get healthcare for everyone, right? And then he tried to overturn the Affordable Care Act.
His party just voted not to protect IVF. They're banning IVF in Alabama and other states. He's fine with that. And he is not in favor of allowing the Comstock Act to ban abortion.
Right. And there's a central tenet on this whole Project 2025, which he disavowed, but his name is mentioned 300 times and is written by many of his ex-staffers or current staffers, is that in this Project 2025, there is, a whole thing about how IVF must be regulated. It must be, that these embryos are people and should be treated the same as normal, fully grown adult humans. I mean, it's just a complete fiasco. Look, he has entered the point where he's pivoting to the general, and he will say anything in the general. But, he has this base that is very anti-choice, and that really did put him in there to install these anti-choice justices and to overturn Roe, which he did and then bragged about. So I don't know how he has it both ways, but he's certainly going to try.
He has it both ways. Charlie Sykes, he bragged that he terminated Roe v. Wade. He says that in his current campaign stops. He is proud of it. He put those justices on at the Heritage Foundation's demand. He did it. He would put more on, younger versions of Clarence Thomas and Alito, who would retire immediately upon his becoming president. So now the media is taking absolutely seriously the idea that he is proposing to help women get IVF for free. Your thoughts?
Well, it is interesting seeing that Donald Trump has decided he's in favor of socialized medicine when it comes to all of this. But I'm really glad you played that 2016 clip with Chris Matthews, because that's kind of a classic moment where it was obvious that Donald Trump had not given 5 seconds worth of thought to the issue. I mean, this is a huge thing for the evangelical base.
Yes.
And now they're coping with the fact that he's throwing them under the bus, that he, the most pro-life president ever, has decided that he's pro-choice. Next week, is he going to come out in favor of taxpayer funding for abortions?
Probably.
What are they going to say then? But
Charlie, if he thinks it'll keep him out of prison, yes, he will.
He will say anything. No, to Molly's point, he wants to have it both ways. But this is what's interesting about this Florida vote. It's a yes or no vote. Mm-hmm. It's up or down. It is a binary choice. He's either going to have to vote and say he's voting in favor of it, which codifies Roe versus Wade, and is a complete repudiation of the pro-life movement, or he's going to have to say, no, I'm going to vote no, in which case he is endorsing this 6-week ban, which makes it very interesting that the Harris campaign has decided to do a bus tour of Florida focusing on reproductive rights, because I think they understand that he's in a vice on this one. So here's the challenge to the media. Keep asking the question, but yes or no. You don't get to write in 8 weeks. You
Correct.
don't get to have, there's not a third choice. It's either basically Roe or 6 weeks, yes or no. And he will do everything possible to avoid answering that question, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't be asked over and over and over again.
Charles Blow, and this is the challenge that I have with our profession, with the media, is that every time Donald Trump is in front of a journalist, they should be asking him, how are you going to vote, as Dasha Burns did, on that, the 6-week abortion ban? Do you favor the 6-week abortion ban in your home state and in Iowa, and these very, short-term abortion bans in North Carolina and all of these red states that you made possible? And the fact that he probably won't be asked about it, like he's not asked about that maybe $10 million bribe from Egypt, like he's not asked to provide even just his basic medical records from one of the biggest stories in our lifetime, the attempted assassination of a president, and we have no medical records from him. He's not asked anything. He's just allowed to vibe. They're just like, entertain us, as Ply said on his Instagram. She's asked to explain. He's just asked to entertain.
Right. And I think you're right that he should not just be asked how he's going to vote on that particular issue, but also be confronted with all of his passages. Was this the truth, or is this now the truth? Which of the things that you're saying are the truth? Because what Donald Trump does is he sets up a paradigm that we accept, which is, I am the abnormal candidate. Everyone else is the normal person. And every time they veer from normality, you have to grill them. I will grill them. I will jump all over them because you're supposed to stay in your lane, which is normal. I can stay in abnormal land and I can do all sorts of abnormal things, and you must accept that as the normal side of me. That is, that's an uneven playing field. And that is not something that we should ever accept in journalism. And I understand that we don't always have enough time. You have 30 minutes. You figure out if you're going to go back and back and back and back at somebody on one question, or do you get to the 5 questions you had ahead of you? But at a certain point, we do have to just say, I'm just going to dedicate to one question, one issue. We're going to get to the bottom of whether or not you're lying now or you were lying then. And if you're lying in either one of those cases, how can the American people be expected to believe you on any one of these issues? If you
can make the time to do that about Kamala Harris and fracking, which like 0% of voters are literally like, well, I guess I can't vote for her because she said fracking thing 1 on one day and fracking thing 2 the other day. If you can devote that much time to her on fracking, you can devote that much time to Donald Trump on the 80 things that he has flip-flopped on. Just try it, media. Just give it a shot. Don't go anywhere. Charles, Molly, Charlie, and David are sticking with me for much more of the latest on this pivotal presidential election and the shenanigans therein.
MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell.
I grew up in the front row of the spectator section in courtrooms. My father was a Boston cop who became a lawyer, and he had me in the courtrooms all the time. And I was learning literally the rules of evidence when I was in high school. My first book was about a case that went on for 7 years. And so everything that happens in courtrooms makes perfect sense to me, and my job is to try to make it make sense to an audience.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, weeknights at 10 p.m. Eastern on MSNBC.
Hey everyone, it's Chris Hayes. This week on my podcast, Why Is This Happening? My friend and colleague Alex Wagner with key takeaways from the Democratic National Convention.
There's just this pent-up emotion to sort of see the pivot towards a better, broader, more inclusive America, and Democrats haven't gotten there, and then boom, you have Kamala Harris. And all of a sudden you have a woman of South Asian and Jamaican descent, a woman who may shatter the glass ceiling, and there's just a sense of like validation and catharsis and like pent-up anticipation and desire just all being uncorked in 1 week in Chicago.
That's this week on Why Is This Happening? Search for Why Is This Happening wherever you're listening right now and follow.
Back with me, Charles Blow, Molly Joan-Fast, Charlie Sykes, and David Rothkopf. David, I want to just wrap up this abortion conversation with you. There has been a genuine backlash to Donald Trump's flip-flop on abortion. The Susan B. Anthony group that is very anti-abortion. The former President Trump now appears determined to undermine his prolific supporters, said an evangelical theologian named Albert Mohler. Kristen Hawkins, the president of Students for Life, which has helped organize tens of thousands of anti-abortion activists on college campuses, wrote on X Twitter, my phone is blowing up with volunteers who no longer will door knock for Donald Trump if this is not corrected. Casey DeSantis, the wife of the Florida governor, weighed in saying the initiative, the voting initiative that Trump seems like he's going to vote for would open the door to taxpayer-funded abortions, and added we must spread the word and vote no on 4. And then the aforementioned Susan B. Anthony, pro-life America president, her name is Marjorie Dannenfelser. She said, I spoke with President Trump. He's not president. President Trump last evening. He is not committed to how he will vote on Amendment 4. President Trump, he's not president, has consistently opposed abortions after 5 months of pregnancy. Amendment 4 would allow abortions past this point. Blah, 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 blah. And voting for Amendment 4 completely undermines his position. Your thoughts on this flip-flop that he seems to be getting away with in the mainstream media?
He flip-flops all the time. He takes both sides of the issue. His whole life has been spent saying to the person he's with what he thought they wanted to hear in order to get what he wanted. I think it's been his social life. It's been his professional life. And we're seeing it right now. I think you put your finger on it, Joy, when you said a moment ago, he doesn't want to go to jail. We are entering the please don't send me to jail phase of this campaign. Everything he is saying to every group is, please don't send me to jail. I will do whatever you want. I don't want to end up my life in a small cell in an orange jumpsuit. And if that means, he was at another group this week and he talked about the 6 states in which you can get an abortion after the baby is born, which is not an abortion. That's murder. It's not true. It doesn't exist anywhere else. But that's what he said because he thought that's what the group wanted to hear. Meanwhile, and I think this is what's important, we have to think about what he would do. He did eliminate Roe v. Wade. He will eliminate pharmaceutical abortion. He will create this 2025 pregnancy monitor big brother position that he talked about. He will strip away more of women's fundamental rights, of voting rights, of the freedoms that Kamala Harris talks about. Why? Why do we know that? Because we've seen this movie before. It happened. We had 4 years of it.
And not only that, David, and I think I think this is people need to start thinking of Donald Trump the way they think about Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the equivalent of him in Israel, who will do whatever his far right backers want, and including kill a lot of people in Gaza, unlimited numbers, because he too is trying to stay out of prison. He too is indicted and will do anything to stay in power. And he's allowed the religious far right to run that country. Trump already has made it clear this man is not a policy wonk. He didn't do policy in his first term. He just let the Heritage Foundation and whoever the thinkers were do it. And he was just like, fine, whatever will make me, whatever you want, do it. He won't be, he is going to let the Project 2025 people run everything because he doesn't know anything. And he's 78, 79 years old. He doesn't want to go to prison. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. Okay, let's move on to his hapless fellow person on his ticket, J.D. Vance. Here is J.D. Vance when he is confronted with making fun of a young woman who did this, she was in a beauty pageant. She had a weird answer on maps that everybody laughed about. Then she said she was suicidal because of the reaction she got. Here's J.D. Vance after being confronted for mocking her.
So when you posted this last night, were you aware that the woman you were posting a picture of had contemplated committing suicide for the attention it received?
No, certainly not, John, and my heart goes out to her, and I hope that she's doing well. There's nothing that says that we can't tell some jokes along the way while we deal with the very serious business of bringing back our public policy. Politics has gotten way too lame, John, way too boring. You can have some fun while making a good argument to the American people about how you're going to improve their lives.
Okay, I just want to be clear, though. You said you did know. Would you like to apologize to Caitlin Upton for posting that last night, given what you've now learned?
John, I'm not going to apologize for posting a joke.
Charlie Sykes, you and I both used to do talk radio. Couldn't you just apologize? Like, what is happening?
Yeah. Well, because in MAGA, there's never an apology, right? You can never say you're sorry. So he's locked into this. And this whole episode was just a reminder that J.D. Vance is really, really bad at this. And trying to, push it off as a joke or we're just having fun. And he has the same reaction to Donald Trump's, bizarre QAnon related tweets, depicting his political enemies in orange jumpsuits, or talking about a military tribunal trial of Barack Obama, because that's funny, because that's just a joke. And unfortunately, this is the world we've created. And by the way, we're still getting the fallout from all the people who thought it was funny to make fun of Gus Walls, 17-year-old son of Tim Walls, who had that deeply human, wonderful moment where he's, tears are coming down his face, and he's saying, "That's my dad." And think about the talk show hosts, including someone I know here in Milwaukee, who decided that was the moment to make fun of this kid who has this, who has a disability, and yet so many of them have a very, very hard time of just saying the human thing, which is, "I'm sorry, that was wrong."
And by the way, the young woman he was making fun of is a conservative who supports Donald Trump. So you're making fun of your own supporters. You spoke of the Walls kids. Here is Tim Walls talking about that moment with his son during that interview last night.
I don't know, as a father, I could have ever imagined that. I'm grateful for so many reasons to be on this ticket, but that moment, to understand what was really important, to have my son feel a sense of pride in me, that I was trying to do the right thing. And it was, you try and protect your kids, it brings notoriety and things, but it was just such a visceral, emotional moment that I'm grateful I got to experience it, and I'm so proud of him.
It's the back of her head, her two little braids, and then I'm in the front of the photograph, obviously speaking, and it's very humbling. It's very humbling in many ways.
Just adding that second piece was Vice President Harris talking about that iconic picture from the New York Times of her little grandniece looking at her speaking during the convention. I'm going to play one more clip, and then I'm going to just get final thoughts from everyone. This is Gwen Walls responding to another one of the really weird questions last night, where the gotcha was that Gwen Walls didn't use IVF, she used IUI, which you get from an IVF clinic when you are trying to treat infertility. Here's Gwen Walls responding to that coming up last night.
Well, for a long time, Tim and I were teachers who struggled with infertility. And we were only able to start a family because of fertility treatments. So this is really personal for me. And I think it is for millions of Americans. We do not take kindly to folks like J.D. Vance telling us when or how to start our families. So let me use my teacher voice. English teachers, you know what these babies are for. Okay, here's my Mr. Vance. How about you mind your own business? Okay, you don't have to put your glasses on, but try with me in your teacher voice. Mr. Vance, how about you mind your own business? Yes.
Ooh, Molly, I think we like Gwen.
She's a very good teacher. She was known as a very good teacher, too, and so was he. IUI and IVF I had 2 of my 3 children from IVF, so it is, and many, many people have had children from IVF, and including, you heard Michelle Obama say that. So it's way more popular. People don't necessarily talk about it as much because it's no one's business.
And where do you get IUI?
The same place you get IVF, from the same doctors, and IUI is a little cheaper, but it's basically pretty much the same.
He's a dude. He got the letters wrong. This is not a gotcha. This is not a thing. That is not a reason people are going to vote for or against him. Charles Blow, Molly Jog-Fast, Charlie Sykes, David Rothkopf, thank y'all for coming on a little early to hang out with us. Thank you so much. And coming up, Project 2025 Exposed with Donald Trump speaking at a book-banning Moms for Liberty gathering tonight. Ooh, fun. We'll examine their ties to Project 2025 and its plan to target teachers and librarians. Do not go anywhere. Tonight, Donald Trump will speak at an event hosted by Moms for Liberty, the far-right group that advocates for banning books in schools under the guise of parental rights. It comes as we've seen an alarming rise in book banning across the U.S. PEN America recorded more than 4,300 instances of book bans between last July and December. More books were banned in those 6 months alone than in the entire previous school year. And over the summer, new laws have gone into effect in states like Utah, Idaho, South Carolina, and Tennessee that will make it more difficult for students this coming school year to access books deemed obscene or indecent by groups like Moms for Liberty. And what's happening in those states could start happening on the national level should Donald Trump retake the White House. Something we know because his buddies at the Heritage Foundation wrote it all down in Project 2025. In fact, Moms for Liberty actually serves on the advisory board for Project 2025. And several individuals tied to the 900-page document will be speaking at their summit this weekend, including the author of the manifesto section on education. You know, the chapter where they say they want to eliminate the Department of Education. But Project 2025 also distinctly targets libraries, writing on page 1 that children, quote, suffer the toxic normalization of transgenderism with drag queens and pornography invading their school libraries, unquote. And let's just be clear, when they say pornography, what they really mean is books by Black or LGBTQ authors written for young adults that sometimes include as little as one page that mentions sex, sexual violence, sexuality, or in some cases, just accurate depictions of racism. But Project 2025 directly calls for the prosecution of teachers and librarians who provide access to any books that these right-wing extremists consider pornographic, saying they should be classed as registered sex offenders. What Project 2025 and groups like Moms for Liberty are doing in their book banning crusade is not just restricting what students can and cannot read. They're also putting teachers and librarians at risk for simply doing their jobs. People like Amanda Jones, a small-town Louisiana librarian who spoke out against censorship in her community. And for those comments, she became the target of a years-long harassment campaign. Well, now Amanda Jones has a book of her own detailing that experience and how she fought back. And she joins me next.
MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell.
When I was working in the Senate, I didn't realize that it's the perfect training for the job that I have now. Covering government, covering politics, the complexity of it all. Mastering the detail is crucial to being able to present anything that happens in Senate buildings or any of the other news centers that we have to focus on every day.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, weeknights at 10 p.m. Eastern on MSNBC.
In July of 2022, Louisiana librarian Amanda Jones spoke out against censorship at her small town's public library board meeting, faced with concerns that they might remove books with LGBTQ themes. Jones spoke as a concerned citizen, saying in part, all members of our community deserve to be seen, have access to information, and see themselves in our public library collection. Censoring and relocating books and displays is harmful to our community, but will be extremely harmful to our most vulnerable, our children. Days later, Amanda became the target of a hateful smear campaign fueled by far-right activists who called her a pedophile, a groomer, and accused her of advocating to keep pornographic materials in her library's kids section. She even began to receive death threats, which took a toll on her physical and mental health. But Jones decided to fight back, making headlines after becoming one of the first librarians in the U.S. to sue those who launched those attacks against her. And now she's telling her story in her new book titled That Librarian, The Fight Against Book Banning in America. And Amanda Jones joins me now. Amanda, thank you so much for being here. This is your book. I'm very glad you wrote it. What prompted you to go this public, given the fact that you faced so many death threats just in your community?
Well, I wanted to tell my story. People were telling a perceived story about me all over social media, and I wanted the truth to get out. And what better way to do it than to write your own book?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me read a little bit of You to You. This is about debunking the core claim of the far right is that any book that has any sexual theme or LGBTQ character in it is pornography. Here's what you wrote. Book censors will often say that there are books containing pornographic or sexually explicit material in children's sections of the library to rile up public fear. They decry the need to protect children from the evil smut they say is next to the Dr. Seuss books. As if a kid could be looking for the very hungry caterpillar and whoops, there's a joy of sex or the Karma Sutra right next to it. That's never the case. Libraries have collection development policies for ordering books, and appropriate books are placed in the appropriate section. Public libraries do not purchase pornography. Adult books are not in the library's children's section, and to suggest otherwise is ridiculous. This seems so elementary. The fact you had to explain it makes me sad. But what do you make of the fact that this is the way that they're trying to get these books out of libraries?
Yes, they take a book out of context and they say there's pornography in the library, and there's not. It's basically an attempt to other and continually already marginalized members of our society, the LGBTQ community, Black, Indigenous people of color. And then, they say they're not banning, they don't want you, but then in their book challenges, it'll say remove. That's a ban. And, even if books are not banned, if they're challenged, they're trying to suppress the, information from our public and school libraries.
Let me read from you from PEN America, the most banned books, and the most bans are in Florida, Texas, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Tennessee, Utah, and Missouri. Genderqueer is the number one most banned book. It's a book about LGBTQ young people. All Boys Aren't Blue, also same topic. This book is Gay by Juno Dawson. The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which my kids all read in junior high school. Flamer by Mike Curato, and of course The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. They have deemed The Bluest Eye to be pornography, which in and of itself, just saying that is pornography.
It's so ridiculous. I read The Bluest Eye. I mean, that book has been around forever.
Yes.
I feel like we've all read it at this point, and it's an amazing book, and it's raw and it's real, and it reflects how we were as a society, and they don't want people to read these stories. They want to suppress the information and pretend it didn't happen. But if you love our country, like I do, we want it to be the best it can be. And what better way than to read about what has happened in our society, and we learn from our mistakes and move forward. But they don't want anyone to hear these stories.
How fearful are you that in a world in which Project 2025 is the law of the land, librarians like you could be put in jail or labeled sex offenders just for providing books?
Very fearful. There have already been laws. They've tried to pass laws in Louisiana to imprison librarians. They tried to pass a law to imprison librarians for attending American Library Association conferences that we successfully defeated. But it's dystopian, and it's for lack of a better word, it's unhinged, in my opinion. Librarians, we love our community. We go into the field of library science to give back to the community. We love children. I don't know a single librarian who doesn't love children and want to do the best we can. They're using us as political pawns, and it's really sad that our politicians would use librarians and educators for political gain.
Did you think of yourself as political before this all started? Did you think of yourself as a liberal, a moderate, a conservative?
No, I'm actually a registered Republican, and I have been my entire life. I will say the past 3 or 4 years, I've definitely voted more Democratic for the Democrat Party, but I consider myself currently an independent.
And the idea that the Republican Party, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because this is happening within one political party. This is not a broad fear that's shared across even independents and Democrats. It's just in the Republican Party. Do you think that it's a sincere belief that these books are harmful, or that it's really just politics and about getting conservatives elected?
Well, with the politicians, no, they do not really believe any of this. They're just using us as pawns. They're using the books and the stories as political pawns. But they stir up real fear in communities where there are real citizens that do believe this, because you're raised to trust your politicians.
Yeah.
And so when, they say that, they tend to be believed. And that's what's really harmful, is that it's being led by politicians.
I interviewed the head of Moms for Liberty, one of the co-founders of it, and she could not answer me why they don't just use this form that you can get in the state of Florida that lets you opt your own kids out of reading books that you object to. Why you have to make that decision for other parents. She really didn't have an answer to that because they want to control everyone, not just their own children. Here is the book, Amanda Jones. This is the book. It is called That Librarian. And I don't know if you know this, but librarians are actually my favorite people. I absolutely love librarians. So thank you so much for being a librarian. And thank you, Amanda Jones, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you. And there is so much more ahead in the second hour of this special 2-hour edition of the ReidOut, including Donald Trump facing a very busy September. He's got a critical debate scheduled with Vice President Kamala Harris. So, he's probably also going to be sentenced in the New York hush money case. Also, the Latino vote is no monolith. It's very diverse. It's a diverse constituency, and both sides of the aisle are pulling out all the stops to win their support. I have a great panel to discuss all of that. So stay with us.
MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell.
When I was working in the Senate, I didn't realize that it's the perfect training for the job that I have now, covering government, covering politics, the complexity of it all. Mastering the detail is crucial to being able to present anything that happens in Senate buildings or any of the other news centers that we have to focus on every day.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, weeknights at 10 p.m. Eastern on MSNBC.
Welcome back to our second hour of this special pre-holiday early bird edition of the ReidOut. Now, before Donald Trump, the Trump era of presidential elections, the conventional wisdom was that presidential campaigns do not get serious until after Labor Day. But for Trump, he will emerge from this Labor Day weekend into a September of court dates and debate. Today, we are expecting the next major step in the federal election interference case against him. Special counsel Jack Smith's team and Trump's attorneys are expected to propose a schedule for future court proceedings. It comes just days after a federal grand jury returned a superseding indictment that charges Trump with the same 4 counts he faced in the original indictment returned last August, but whittled down in light of the right-wing majority Supreme Court's ruling in favor of Trump that presidents have immunity for official acts. We could also hear from Judge Tanya Chutkan in the matter. Both sides are scheduled to appear before Judge Chutkan for a hearing next week, the first court hearing in that case since the Supreme Court ruling. That hearing is next Thursday, September 5th. Just 5 days before Donald Trump will face off in a debate with Vice President Harris on September 10th. The following week, September 16th, New York Judge Juan Marchand is set to rule on Trump's motion to have the verdict in the hush money election interference case thrown out because of the Supreme Court's ruling on immunity. If he declines to do so, Trump will be sentenced in that case on September 18th, 7 weeks before Election Day, November 5th. In addition to ruling on Trump's immunity motion in New York, Judge Marchand has yet to rule on Trump's request to postpone his sentencing until after the election. So Trump's lawyers are throwing another Hail Mary on that. Late Thursday, his lawyers filed to move the matter to federal court in yet another delay tactic, citing the Supreme Court's ruling in July. A federal judge has rejected that effort for now, but advised it could be refiled with either opposing parties' written consent or court's leave. It is not the first time Trump's lawyers have tried to get the hush money case moved to federal court. His lawyers invoked presidential immunity in a failed bid last July, setting the stage for his trial and conviction on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. Last year, federal judge Alvin Hallerstein ruled that the evidence presented involved something personal to the president, quote, a cover-up of an embarrassing event. Hush money paid to an adult film star is not related to a president's official acts. It does not reflect in any way the color of the president's official duties. I cannot believe a judge had to actually say that and that I had to read it to you. But here is where we are. Joining me now is Andrew Weissman, MSNBC legal analyst and former federal prosecutor, and Maya Wiley, president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and former assistant U.S. attorney. That was a lot, friends. I'm going to start with you, Andrew, because it's a lot. to parse through.
Totally.
But I want to start with whether or not Donald Trump has any chance of taking that 34 count felony conviction and somehow moving it to federal court in order to throw it out based on what the Supreme Court has ruled.
So the direct answer is it is highly unlikely that he is going to be able to get it to federal court. As you noted, he has made that motion and lost it.
Yeah.
And, the only intervening fact is this Supreme Court decision that should not be enough to have Judge Hellerstein revisit his ruling. Remember, though, that whether it's in state court or it's in federal court, that changes who the judge is. But whether the Supreme Court gets to ultimately weigh in on the 34 counts to say were they tainted by immunized testimony is something that the Supreme Court of the United States gets to weigh in on eventually. That's what I'm sort of mostly worried about.
Yes.
Because even if it goes through the state court process, eventually Donald Trump
get it back.
gets to exactly.
And it's clear to me, and I think it's now clear to most of our fair viewers, that John Roberts is going to protect Trump. And that if at the moment he gets it back, he's going to find a way to get him out of going to jail, right? That's what's happening.
Well, let's just say it's not a very positive Supreme Court if we care about the Constitution and if we care about the rule of law. And that is our reality. I mean, but look, going back to what Andrew's so rightly said, I think we also have to remember that part of what we're seeing here is every effort to ensure the delay, because it is consequential. If the American public that has to make a decision about how to cast a ballot is seeing Donald Trump repeatedly in a courtroom, because that visual alone is unheard of in our history. And so whether it is now or later, what they're just trying to make sure is it's later, so that they're actually in a position where voters are not being reminded constantly that not only is he a convicted felon, but that it may make a difference what happens to him after an election.
Yeah, and by the way, let's put the calendar back up on that point. This is the calendar again. So you see the first date in this calendar once it's up there? September 5th, this hearing in the federal election interference case. The day after that, North Carolina starts early voting. So people will be voting between that hearing and the debate with Vice President Harris. Before the debate even happens, one state will already be early voting, Maya. This is going to be a thing that's happening regardless of the outcome on the 6th.
And it's a state in play. Right.
And it's a state very much in play.
There's a lot of money being spent by the Trump campaign in North Carolina right now.
Yeah.
And so, again, they're really looking at this, I think, no personal knowledge, but they're looking at this and they're seeing the chessboard and they want to make sure other people aren't looking at it too.
Well, the way that I think the rest of us are looking at it, though, is a rule of law question. Here, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson does not do a lot of interviews. She has not done very many interviews. She's now done one. And this is her talking about that Supreme Court immunity ruling. Here she is.
You were concerned about broad immunity. I was concerned about a system that appeared to provide immunity for one individual under one set of circumstances, when we have a criminal justice system that had ordinarily treated everyone the same.
And I just, to that point, want to quote from the filing by Donald Trump's legal team asking the federal court to take over that hush money case, because it goes to this. Accordingly, they call him still President Trump. Respectfully request that the court accept this second removal notice, confirm that Justice Marchand may not sentence President Trump during litigation over the second removal notice. They're leaning into his former role and saying, essentially, you can't touch him while this election is happening.
Look, what we're really talking about, take the lens out, is the American legal system has failed. This is one where, unlike other legal systems around the globe that have managed to hold political leaders to account, we have not.
Yeah.
Donald Trump has figured out a way to play the system, and he's been aided and abetted by the Supreme Court, by Judge Cannon, to slow things down so that the actual sort of accountability is whether guilty or not guilty, is that day of reckoning is put off. Now in New York, it's about putting off the day of reckoning of sentencing, because Judge Merchan, to his credit, at least got that case to trial. But this is really, sort of a grade. I'm a professor, so I give grades. This is sort of an F for how we fare compared to so many other sort of so-called Western democracies that do actually know how to hold people to account.
And the thing that makes it even worse, to be honest, is that it feels in some ways like the conservative members of the Supreme Court are doing it also in their own self-interest, because I think everyone understands that Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas will retire immediately upon the inauguration of another Republican president. If Trump comes in, they go out, and allowing the Heritage Foundation, the same group that's put all six of them on the bench, to put 2 30 or 40-year-old versions of them on the bench. We kind of know who they are. There's some of the judge who have made some of the most insane rulings to the far right, and we know that is what's going to happen. So you have just John Roberts, who's sort of portrayed as this sort of moderate, normal person, but it's clear that he's down with that. He wants that.
So, look, we to Andrew's point and to your point, Joy, the system, the judicial system has failed, and I do say judicial. I mean, the civil side actually did work when it came to Donald Trump, right? It really is the criminal, but it's also the Supreme Court by not holding to our constitutional, not just norms, but precedents. I mean, they butchered the precedents in their opinion on immunity, and they've butchered them over and over and over again whenever it comes to the guardrails.
Section 3 of the 14th Amendment apparently does not exist.
Exactly.
They wrote that on accident.
Exactly. So, but I think the point here, coming back to the importance of the calendar that you pointed to, and how a democracy fixes the problem of a failure of a democratic system like the court system is elections. And so the importance of not losing the court date, and I do mean this in the Judge Merchan case, to remind folks of what's at stake, because Project 2025, just as you just did a segment on, the difference between who is in office and how they utilize a power that the Supreme Court says they have to be protected from the accountability of the judicial system. The way that they can utilize the Department of Justice is actually on the ballot.
100%.
So I think it's actually critically important that the date hold, because I think it's important that Americans be reminded of what questions they need to answer for themselves when they show up at the polls.
That's right, because how Donald Trump would use that power versus how Kamala Harris would use it, very different. And he has made it clear he will use it to harm people he thinks are his enemies. But I wanted to just do one note on Jack Smith, because I do think that Jack Smith is kind of a bright light in an otherwise pretty dark landscape. And I include Merrick Garland in the dark, okay, because I don't think he's done hardly anything to be helpful. But Jack Smith is persistent. This superseding indictment, how effective is it at trying to finally get us to some sort of an answer, at least on the charges of trying to overthrow the government?
So one, I completely agree with you with Jack Smith. He is smart and tenacious, and you have to be tenacious in this landscape with what he's had to put up with, whether it's Judge Cannon or the Supreme Court. And he's done two things. One, everyone's focused a lot on the deletions, which is he deleted material to make it conform to what he has to, which is the Supreme Court decision. He's stuck with that. So they just, from that, the case is weaker. He had to take out certain allegations, the material about the president's interactions with the Department of Justice. I just want to say it because it's so outrageous, meaning that the president can tell his Department of Justice to engage in a sham investigation. He's immune. So that is not in the case, because the Supreme Court has said that is a core presidential function, engaging in a sham investigation.
And can we just pull back on there for a moment? Because that means that Donald Trump, if he came back in, could say, investigate Barack Obama, I'm going to make up and invent a crime, and that is literally legal for him to do, according to John Roberts.
That is absolutely right. He cannot be prosecuted for that. That is a core presidential function. It is beyond shocking that is something that Supreme Court wrote here. It was clearly just tailored to the situation here. The other thing, though, that Jack Smith did is he added various allegations to make it clear that what remains in the case is either personal conduct or conduct as a candidate, not as a president.
Yeah.
So he has grand jury findings on that. So he added in a lot of language to make that clear. He also dealt with a new obstruction decision from the Supreme Court to make it clear that Donald Trump did obstruct, that he involved allegations involving what he was going to do with physical ballots, because remember the Supreme Court said that's part of obstruction now, is that has to do with the actual documents that are going to Congress. And Jack Smith said, yes, that's what happened here. So he really looked at what the Supreme Court had done and then tailored it to deal with that. We'll see what happens today. And then in terms of the one thing that could happen is there could be a hearing, the so-called mini trial, and it'll be interesting to see what the parties say about that.
Yeah.
And then obviously next week we'll know whether Judge Chutkan is going to order that before the general election.
I hope that he is successful. He is the one. He's making us feel a little tiny bit hopeful. I just want to note for our audience that Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, the two Georgia election workers, they are asking the court to control Rudy Giuliani's assets after his $148 million judgment. If you want to have a final word on that, I mean, they should get that money, right? All his money.
They should get all that money.
All of it.
And we also should remember that what they faced and suffered.
Yes.
We have other folks that may face it and suffer it in this cycle.
That's right.
It is critically important that all of the accountability be enforced.
I want to note that the Arlington National Cemetery Army employee was afraid to file charges after essentially being physically, we could say, assaulted, physically pushed. We don't know what happened, but they were too afraid to file charges because they were afraid of Donald Trump's base. That is how low we have sunk. Andrew Weissman, Maya Wiley, always a pleasure. Thank you very much. And coming up, securing the Latino vote will be crucial in this year's presidential election. We will take a deeper look at that very important voting bloc next.
MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell.
When I was working in the Senate, I didn't realize that it's the perfect training for the job that I have now, covering government, covering politics, the complexity of it all. Mastering the detail is crucial to being able to present anything that happens in Senate buildings or any of the other news centers that we have to focus on every day.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, weeknights at 10 p.m. Eastern on MSNBC.
Hey everyone, it's Chris Hayes. This week on my podcast, Why Is This Happening? My friend and colleague Alex Wagner with key takeaways from the Democratic National Convention.
There's just this pent-up emotion to sort of see the pivot towards a better, broader, more inclusive America. And Democrats haven't gotten there. And then, boom, you have Kamala Harris. And all of a sudden, you have a woman of South Asian and Jamaican descent, a woman who may shatter the glass ceiling. And there's just a sense of like validation and catharsis and like pent-up anticipation and desire just all being uncorked in 1 week in Chicago.
That's this week on Why Is This Happening? Search for Why Is This Happening wherever you're listening right now and follow.
Latino voter turnout lagged an astounding 22 points behind the rate of white voters in the 2022 midterm elections. That is a remarkable number, given that we've seen a more than doubling of Latino voters in the last 20 years, with an estimated 36 million Latinos eligible to vote just this year. Hispanics are already the largest racial or ethnic group in California and Texas. They account for almost half the population growth nationwide since 2010, with over 80% of those living in the country here as citizens. So as we near this election, just 67 days away, we need to pay attention to this potentially decisive and growing voting bloc and ask why turnout is way behind where it could be. Joining me now is contributor Paula Ramos, Maria Teresa Kumar, president and CEO of Voto Latino, and Mike Madrid, co-founder of the Lincoln Project and the author of The Latino Century, How America's Largest Minority is Transforming Democracy. Thank you all for being here. Paula, I'm going to come to you first because you are constantly in the field. You're talking to these voters. It is kind of one of the puzzles that this is the largest non-white group in America. Full stop. Exactly. More than black voters. But the voting turnout is really low. It's almost like half their voting strength. Why?
Yeah, I mean, even looking at 2022, there was this real sentiment of disillusionment among a lot of Latinos, right? There was a lot of skepticism towards President Biden. A lot of that had to do and was rooted in this idea that, according to many, there were a lot of broken immigration promises. And then suddenly, in the last 2 weeks, I've started to hear the si se puede again. No?
Yeah.
And that is once again this idea that perhaps
Yes,
what
we
was
can.
missing, the yes we can, but the si se puede in Spanish is so intentional.
Yeah.
And it points to this idea that it wasn't that the Democratic Party was fractured. No, it was that what was missing was injecting the inspiration, the hope and change that Barack Obama did.
Yeah.
And it is working. You do see Latinos being mobilized. That's sort of the messaging standpoint. And then on the other flip side, it's Republicans. No? The moment that this country turned into majority-minority, no?
Yeah.
The understanding that Latinos are at the heart of the multi-ethnic coalition that is leading to that change, there is a concerted effort to stop that growth. And all of that is also being fueled by this conspiracy theory that is overshadowing everything, which is this idea that non-citizens, exactly, great replacement theory and this idea that non-citizens are voting. And you put those things together.
And the thing about it is, and let me actually get Mike Madrid in here, because some of it is people misunderstand the demographics of Latinos. They assume that I remember a poll back in many years ago that showed that Americans believe that like 75% of Latinos are undocumented, which is insane. It's literally like 80% are citizens, right? And so there is this misunderstanding of who this constituency are and assuming, well, they're all undocumented because they may speak Spanish at home. And so can you give us the real numbers and the real stats on this constituency? And also how different it is across the country, because it's regionally very different.
Yeah, it's actually not as different as we think it is. What is happening, this Latinization of America, is an extraordinary demographic transformation. It's what I try to explore in the book here. You actually mentioned a lot of it in your intro with this 7% growth over just the past decade. It's overwhelmingly U.S. born, right? A lot of this is what is happening with this balancing between the two parties. There's a demographic explanation for it as much as there is a political explanation for it. So I think you accurately pointed out, this is the largest ethnic group in America at this point. Yes, our voter participation is lagging every other racial and ethnic group. I believe that there are strong demographic reasons for that. The fact that we're so young, by the way, is one of the main reasons. Younger voters have a less propensity, regardless of race or ethnicity, to vote. We're working on that. Maria Teresa's group specifically has been working to address that for many years successfully. It is happening. The trajectory is on the right path. There's a lot of people who argue that simply by aging into the electorate, Latinos will start to grow into greater numbers. But of course, with so many citizen-eligible folks, we want to make sure that there are people not only registered, but mobilized and showing up to demonstrate that strength. But again, there's there's also this endemic poverty problem that we have to recognize, which is also a function of youth. Poor people, it doesn't matter whether you're Black in the Deep South or white in Appalachia or Latino in East LA. If you're poor and young, you don't vote.
They don't vote. Very true.
We've got to look for those policy explanations as much as looking for these political solutions, because it's pretty widespread. It's pretty deep. There's over 70 years of census data telling us that a lot of this is demographic.
Absolutely. And MTK, you've been invoked, so I want to bring you in here because you've been working on this project of increasing that vote strength. Because again, we had a guy on, earlier this year who made a really great point that America sort of styles itself as like a quasi-European country, but we're really much more a Latin American country. Our history, our demographics, a lot of it is much more like Brazil, right, than it is like England. But we try to fool ourselves into saying that's not the case, but it kind of is, right? And so how do you break that cycle? Because part of it is age and part of it is wealth, that people aren't voting. But how do you bring more Latino voters online?
So I think it's all intentional. I mean, you cited what happened in 2022. I'll tell you that from 2022 compared to the 2018 midterm election, Latino vote participation was 37%, down 37%. But if you look at who turned out in 2022, it was people over the age of 40 years old. And it was disproportionately individuals that were Republican, because what the Republicans did was invest in older Latino voters for turnout. However, when it came down to young voters under the age of 40, turnout was an abysmal 24%. And that was because the Democrats read the headline, internalized it, and said, oh my gosh, Latinos, maybe they're fleeing Republican. So there was a major lack of investment. when it came to communicating to young Latinos that the issues that they cared about in 2022 were on the ballot. And I think what we're seeing now with Kamala Harris is that she's meeting voters where they are. I can tell you anecdotally, just from our work, since the moment she came on the ballot, we have registered over 110,000 registered voters. But the key is that 65% of them, Joy, are under the age of 25. I've been doing this for a minute. I have never seen that type of enthusiasm, but it's not just because of what she represents. It's to Mike Madrid's point is that she's talking about policy they care about. The number one issue for 18 to 29-year-olds in this country who are Latino in North Carolina, in Georgia, in Texas, in Arizona, the number one issue is housing, it's rent. And so when she came out with a policy just last week, meeting people where they are, talking to them about providing affordable rent, affordable mortgages, that all of a sudden perked their interest because like, wait a second, she is someone who identifies me as a child of immigrant experiences, but at the same time understands that what's making me struggle is whether or not I can balance the budget to feed myself or make my ends meet at the end of the month. And that is transformational.
And Paula, I want to come back to you on this because it's a great point, because I think people think Latino, they think immigration. Their only issue is immigration. They care about immigration, but that's not like a driving issue. It is affordability, and it also changes. I mean, in the state of Texas, you talk to a lot of, Latinos who are like hardcore Republicans. Their issues are like guns and like religion.
No, yeah. I mean, I think the point of the story is when we say that Latinos are not a monolith, no, is also saying Latinos are just like any other American, no? They care about the economy. They care about housing, like Maria Teresa just said. They care about everything that any other ordinary American would. But I do have to say, they also care about immigration. Yeah. I was just on the phone yesterday with a lot of voters from Georgia, Latino voters. One of the number one things that young Latino folks in Georgia are scared about is this idea that if Trump walks into the White House, once again, you will see local sheriffs cooperating again with ICE. And so I do sort of want to take the conversation that way, because I think there's this idea that, Latinos are warming up to mass deportations. That is also true.
This is the thing. Can you get into that? Because Republicans keep on insisting that the Latino community wants mass deportation and is for it.
I think two things can exist at the same time. I think it is a very small but growing number of Latinos that are warming up to mass deportations and that are sort of taking in the anti-immigrant sentiment, because again, you and I have talked about this. The xenophobia is so powerful. No, this idea, when Trump does that really well, he believes that Latinos have become so Americanized that they too can buy into the nativism. Yeah. And that is part of his messaging to Latinos. And it works for some folks.
And it's also in language media. Can we talk about the fact that if you listen to Spanish language radio in Miami or in South Texas, you're not hearing even what you hear on Fox. It's far to the right of that.
It's completely far to the right. So, but that is a very targeted message. This idea that Latinos too can otherize immigrants better than anyone else. But so many Latinos, talk to them in Arizona, talk to them in Texas, in Nevada, in Georgia, are so scared about what Project 2025 means. This idea that mass deportations can happen. Those are also conversations that a lot of Latinos are having.
Yeah, and when we come back, don't go anywhere, because we're going to come back. Paula, Maria Teresa, and Mike are going to stick with us for much more Latino vote. I want to talk about whether abortion politics are starting to seep into the conversation among Latino voters. We'll be right back. Back with me, Paula Ramos, Maria Teresa Kumar, and Mike Madrid. I want to talk real quickly about whether abortion is becoming an issue within the Latino voter community. You did a piece, Paula, when you were talking about some of the perils that, women of color disproportionately are facing in Latino women when it comes to abortion. How much is abortion a conversation when you're talking to folks?
It's huge. I think Maria Teresa saw it on the ground in 2022. For the first time in years, the issue of abortion became a top issue for Latino voters, right? It mobilized, and this is the incredible thing, it didn't just mobilize young Latinos and mothers and abuelas. The interesting thing is that even if you have Catholic Latinas, that perhaps morally were opposed to it, they were able to humanize the issue and able to understand morally that they couldn't stand with Donald Trump, right? And so I think the party is really, really galvanizing every sector of the Latina coalition. And interestingly, in Florida, they're understanding that is the one issue that perhaps can become more powerful than the communism, socialism. Right. Democrats are socialists. Why? Because it's personal. The same way that socialism is a personal issue for so many Latinos in South Florida, abortion is more personal than that. And it is mobilizing a lot.
Absolutely. And then MTK, let's talk a little bit about the race issue, because the question of race inside of the Latino community is complex, because a person who is Latino can identify as white, they can identify as black, or neither, or whatever. It's much more complicated. So race politics get complicated. Talk a little bit about that.
It's so interesting because when Barack Obama was on the ballot against Hillary Clinton, it was something that was percolating out of her campaign, saying that Latinos would never vote for a black candidate. When in fact, what we knew, even when Barack Obama was running for Congress against a Latino candidate, Latinos overwhelmingly voted for him in Chicago because of his issues. And so while race in our conversations behind closed doors could be complicated, Latinos are looking for individuals that are talking mostly about the issues they care about. They want to resolve issues. And when it comes, for example, with a candidate like Kamala Harris, the vast majority of Latinos identify with her story. They identify with who she is. And what I see, if anything, this idea that she can talk about really complex issues in a way that connects with the humanness of what we're struggling with becomes really important. When we talk about abortion, for example, one of the things that most people don't realize is that while the average white woman is roughly 47 years old, the average Latina is 30 years old. Mm-hmm. She is in the middle of her childbearing years. This is an economic issue. Many of them are trying to decide, do they want another child? Do they want to go back to school? Do they want to invest in their families? And because they're 30 and they happen to be Latina, they are also much younger when it comes to the sandwich generation. They are already starting to take care of their parents while taking care of a younger family. And so with the issue of abortion, for example, when Kamala Harris speaks about it, they know that she's talking from the heart, but also that she intends to do something about it. And that's why the Republicans don't want to touch it. They are so fearful of that issue because it is mobilizing and galvanizing. And when people say that Latinos are Catholic, we are absolutely Catholic. But we are Pope Francis Catholic. We are social justice Catholic. We believe in environment. We believe that if you are going to make the tough decision of abortion, it's something between you and your God, and that you are not to judge that person because we have not been in their shoes. And the more that Kamala Harris and the rest of the Democrats could understand that and embrace that, that allows them to have a broader conversation when it comes to mobilizing the Latino community based solely on social truths.
Yeah. And Mike, unpack for us kind of how all these issues are kind of laying out. I mean, you look at these numbers. What issues are driving these voters? And is it true that there is this surge toward Donald Trump? I don't see it or hear it anecdotally, but folks keep saying it's true. What are you seeing?
Well, first, I mean, look, let me talk about the social issues, because I think both Paula and Maria Teresa outlined this perfectly, and I think it needs to be underscored. But I want to drive one point home. Abortion and being a pro-life position has never been a driving element of Latino politics, ever. And this idea that we are all Catholics, while I'm a practicing Catholic, that's quantifiably not true either. Catholicism has been collapsing with Latinos since the late 80s, and it's never been the social issues that have driven us for political change. They are, as was pointed out, the social justice issues. That is absolutely true. And most importantly, as we become, the explosive numbers of Latino registrations are happening with third and now a discernible fourth generation voter. These are overwhelmingly pro-choice voters. So this vote has always benefited the Democrats. There's been a hesitancy to lean into it by the Democratic Party because of this caricaturization of who we are: Spanish-speaking, immigrant, Catholic. There's much more nuance to these basic kind of cartoonish caricatures that have been made of us that are not true. The real lesson, I think, to all of this is understanding that the Latino voter that we have known and identified for the past 25 years is going to be wholly different than the Latino of the next 25 years for one simple reason, and it's the graphic you showed again at the introduction. Mm-hmm. The explosive growth of all these Latino numbers that are happening, all of these Latinos turning 18, they are not naturalized voters. They're third and again now fourth generation voters. So is there a surge towards Donald Trump? No, there is not. But there is an incremental movement away for the past decade that has been happening 1% and 2% at a time. 2020 was a 7-8% jump, but that gradual change is seeing our community being represented in both parties. That's nothing to be afraid of. It's something to embrace, because our gente is going to redefine both parties. Latinos are essentially the moderates in both parties. And I think the greatest salvation, as I write in my book, to help us get away from Trumpism is larger Latino voters within the Republican Party to move it in a different direction.
Yeah, and I think it's a really great point that you make, because it's a swing community, because it's about a 65-35 community, meaning it's still winnable for Republicans and Democrats if Republicans and Democrats create opportunity. I'm sorry, Maria, go ahead.
So it's so interesting, because prior to Kamala Harris, we were seeing the exact same thing. We were seeing that toe-to-toe, Biden was at 59 and Trump was at 39. When we introduced a third party, all of a sudden Biden dropped by 47 and the third party was 17%. Headed into the convention, literally the Friday before the convention, Joy, Kamala was polling at 60%, 7% independent, and 29% Trump in key battleground states. This is a poll of 2,000 voters in Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada. And what we found really striking is that she was pulling, yes, from the independents, because we expected that. But the fact that she was polling in Georgia and in Texas and in Arizona from Donald Trump among Latino voters, that says that there is a real alignment closer to Latinos voting as they did under Obama than they did under Bush.
Absolutely. And in states where people don't think about Latino voters, North Carolina.
Exactly.
States like, it's not just Florida and Texas. Like, this is the thing we do. Okay, we need to do this again. Paula Ramos, Maria Teresa Kumar, Mike Madrid, thank you all very much. We come back and do this again. I think this is important to unpack this stuff. Coming up, the conflict in the Middle East rages on, with Israel's military operation in the occupied West Bank now in its third day. We'll be right back. The Israeli military struck the West Bank city of Jenin today, the third day of heavy fighting in one of the largest assaults on the Palestinian territory in over 2 decades. The Palestinian Health Ministry says 20 people have died since Israel launched the raids on Wednesday, and more than 600 have died in the West Bank alone since October 7th. That includes nearly 150 children. While in Gaza, the rising death count has surpassed 40,000 people. Joining me now is Daniel Levy, president of the U.S. Middle East Project and a former Israeli negotiator. Daniel, it's so good to see you. Even under these circumstances, I think for a lot of people, there is a certain shock that the violence has moved to the West Bank. Your thoughts?
Important to understand, Joy, and it's good to see you, that this, of course, is the 6th decade of an Israeli occupation of the West Bank, which, according to the International Court of Justice, is itself illegal, dotted with illegal settlements, and things weren't good for decades. They weren't good prior to October 7th. The West Bank is the larger territory. It's 16 times the size of Gaza. The provocations of this government prior to October 7th were expanding. One saw, if people can even cast their minds back, one saw these settlers carrying out what the Israeli press called pogroms. This all happened before October 7th. It gets worse, of course, in response to October 7th. Mass arrests, the largest number of killings in the West Bank for a number of years. And now this latest intensification. We're being told it's a major operation starting in the northern West Bank. We know that the Israeli side says this is about security. There is no military solution. Security is a real thing, but security is being used as an excuse. For what? And I think this is what's important to understand. First of all, this serves the Israeli prime minister politically. He's staking a claim that he needs to be in power because he is the indispensable wartime leader. Therefore, continue the war and expand to another front. This time, the West Bank. Interestingly, we're talking just after an Israeli war cabinet meeting in which the Israeli defense minister and the prime minister, it's out in the open, had an altercation because the defense minister and the defense establishment have said that the prime minister is undermining the ceasefire talks. Netanyahu doesn't want a ceasefire. He is ideologically committed to keeping the West Bank. His coalition guidelines, the text which holds the coalition together, says the Jewish people have an exclusive right to all parts of the land of Israel. So that includes the West Bank. And they are taking advantage of just how promiscuous an environment they have internationally and primarily from the US. They saw that there is no stop sign in Gaza And they are quite confident that there will be no stop sign in the West Bank either, because the arms continue to flow. And this is a terrible escalation. It's going to make ceasefire talks harder, and it further risks that broader conflagration, Joy.
And they've gotten exactly one more hostage out with all that. So it's clearly not about getting hostages out. And this hostage was basically left in a tunnel on his own, which is how he got out. You're not seeing these massive hostage rescues. And yet, to your point, they killed their negotiating partner. They went into Iran's territory and killed the guy that we're supposedly negotiating a peace deal with, the non-militant Hamas leader that they killed, and are now seen to be opening up a second front with Lebanon. What is the end game here? Because as you said, for Bibi Netanyahu, the end game is stay in power forever, clear. And he's clearly willing to empower his far-right settler partners in his government who do believe in this messianic vision of taking over all of the West Bank. What's the end game here? Because the Biden administration still claims that they are going for a two-state solution. That does not seem to be something Netanyahu will ever allow.
Very clearly, that's not something Netanyahu will ever allow. I don't know that there is an end game as such. So, first of all, yes, you have a remarkable situation in which even a former deputy national security advisor of Israel's has said that the recounting of events of that latest springing of a hostage, very few have gotten out alive that way, that Israel's version of events was less credible than the Hamas version. Coming from an Israeli former deputy national security advisor, that's a big deal. I think what Netanyahu is trying to do is maintain an open-ended war that doesn't necessarily have an end game. And I think on the other side, the axis of resistance is saying we're not going to fall into your trap of bringing America in to an all-out war. But yes, we will continue asymmetric warfare because you actually have a lot of vulnerabilities. Your economy is not doing well. Your society is deeply polarized. You are part of a global economy that is getting more difficult for you to operate in. And so the question when it comes to this latest West Bank effort is, does this have a deeper strategic purpose? Because you will no doubt be reporting on a lot of these operations happening in refugee camps in the West Bank. And we've, of course, seen what's happened in refugee camps in Gaza. People may ask themselves, what's this about? What are these refugee camps? That is the story of the Palestinians being pushed out in the Nakba at the creation of Israel, being ethnically cleansed in 1948. And many people look at the narratives coming out of the Israeli government today. And is this a second attempt at mass displacement, ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and creating such a scorched earth? We're now seeing destruction of infrastructure also in the West Bank. And that has massive implications, of course, for the Israeli-Palestinian and regional future. But I think it has massive implications for the U.S. in national security, geopolitical terms, and apparently also in political terms, because you have an election there, I'm told, and this issue is not playing well for the Democrat leadership.
It is a depressing reality. One wonders why we have a system of international laws if they're not being followed. Daniel Levy, it is always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Much appreciated as always. And we'll be right back. Well, friends, it's earlier in the day, but we still made it to the end of another week, which means, yes, it is time to play our favorite game. Who won the week? And as it is the Friday before Labor Day, I shall make the solo pick. And it is those whose labor was rewarded this week in the state of Georgia by none other than the Vice President of the United States, who, along with her running mate, Coach and Governor Tim Walz, made a point of stopping by small businesses in Savannah to buy some sweets and did a little interview that 6 million people watched. And here's how it all went down at Dottie's.
What is that cake?
Caramel.
Just Jay's. I want a slice of that. Caramel is like my favorite. Okay, chocolate and caramel? Fantastic. What are you getting?
Oh, I'm good.
No, you don't want anything sweet? You don't want anything sweet? Get something sweet.
Well, you talked about that caramel cake.
Yeah. Okay, and then a slice of the cake for the Congresswoman, and then my slice. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
We welcome people pushing for you to get sweet. So for my money, Dottie's Market on Broughton Street, The Gray, and Kim's Cafe, the location where Vice President Harris did her interview, and they got that visit. They sold some delicious treats to two candidates who actually know how to order food like normal people. And all of the people who work there won the week. We just love small businesses over here on the ReidOut. So congratulations to all and happy Labor Day. That is tonight's ReidOut. But before we go, be sure to scan the little QR code on your screen to buy tickets to MSNBC Live Democracy 2024, our premier fan event taking place Saturday, September 7th in Brooklyn, New York. I will be there with the rest of the gang. You do not want to miss it.
On the MSNBC podcast, How to Win 2024, former Senator Claire McCaskill is joined by fellow political experts and insiders to examine the campaign strategies unfolding in this all-important election.
We have emerged with the teacher, the coach, the veteran, the governor, Tim Walz. I always think it's better to have somebody on the ticket that has actually won in a state that's hard.
Search for How to Win 2024 wherever you get your podcasts and follow. New episodes every Thursday.